Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for participating in the COVID-19 talk series. Today, this talk is going to be delivered by Dr. Li Qinghua. That's me. Okay, you can call me Kent. The topic of today's talk is sociological imagination and pandemics. So perhaps I'll just skip all the other rituals and go straight to the talk. Okay. Now, there's three parts, and I have to emphasize that this is, of course, not an admission talk. So there's a new part I added. No, not new part. I mean, there's a part 3, which is more technical. Anyway, so this is the topic that I'm going to cover today. First, I'll talk a little bit about what is sociology and how sociologists may approach the issues or approach this public health crisis around the world. In the second part, I'll use sociological imagination to, how should I say, to analyze or interpret this pandemic, and so that we can how should I say, we can think from our personal perspective or your how your social experience are actually linked to this historical event. Now, and lastly, in part 3, I will try to give you some insight by discussing what I found from sociology of disaster. There has been quite a lot of research in this area by using the concept of social capital and exploring how community recover or response to major disaster, like usually the natural one. But there's quite some insights that maybe we can draw from the sociology of disaster and apply to the current situation of pandemic. All right, so let's start. First, what is sociology? Since some of you are not yet sociology majors, or you may not know what is sociology. So let's start with something about the background of the discipline. Okay, this sociology emerged in the 18th and 19th century in response to great social, political, and economic change, particularly in the Western society. Okay, at that time there was industrialization, urbanization, mass migration from continents to continents, or from the rural area to the urban area, and of course also including the spread of capitalism to other parts of the world, and secularization, and like a rationalization of the society. All right, so sociologists rose to respond to such a big social change in the past, like at that time, trying to explore the reasoning or the reasons, or how this social phenomenon evolved in the society, especially in the Western society at that time. But in the contemporary era, sociologists has expanded their study to not just the phenomenon that we have just discussed, to include study of social life and social interaction that happened at any place. It can be in the kitchen, it can be on the street, or in the public hospital, or like basically everywhere, or in a bar or pub. So it involves any kind of relationship. It can be things happening between family members, your peers, or very often between strangers, okay, or like sometimes work colleagues, okay. So that's it. Like if we use the COVID-19 example, so how would sociologists, for example, ask questions or address these recent pandemic situations? Okay, so well, actually not sociology. Let's take the example. You are a how should I say, A&E doctor, like in the front line, admitting patients who are suspected to have contracted COVID-19, or who have demonstrated some related symptoms, something like that. So at the front line, maybe you're a doctor or a nurse, and then you observe the patients, and then you find that there seems to be a disproportional number of, for example, like in the US case, ethnic minorities being admitted to your hospital. Like, say, for example, LFID, for Caucasians, there are like 5 or 6 ethnic minorities. So you discover this fact, okay, or something that happened around you, and you have a puzzle in mind. So, and what would sociologists do? So those are the frontline experiences. So sociologists will ask the questions, okay? Is there a trend or is there a pattern in this admission or concerning ethnic minorities concerning their proportion to the other ethnic groups, okay? First, like in terms of trend, of course, it happened along a timeline. Is it increasing? Is there an increasing number of ethnic minorities among the patients admitted, or is it actually decreasing? Okay, and then they will go to different A&E, or they will go to different hospital clinics to collect data. So they start to ask, is there cluster in terms of this proportion of ethnic minorities in the public health system? So do they cluster in certain area, or are they like evenly distributed among many different districts? So, and then after you collect the data, then you can start to ask, is there anything special about the proportion? Is it proportionate, say for example, to the percentage of population that are the corresponding ethnic minorities? Say for example, if they only contribute to 5% of the populations, okay, for example, African American, but they show up in the A&E or in the public hospital, like up to 20% of all the patients like being admitted, then we can say it sounds like disproportional. So there must be a reasons why they seems to be more likely to be to actually show up at this public hospital or clinics during the pandemic. Okay, so we also ask another questions. What are the treatment outcome? Can you survive? Okay, like what are the proportion of these ethnic minorities compared to other ethnic group that actually survive the treatment? Survive means like they actually get killed and walk out of the hospital or of the clinics. Okay, so because treatment outcome can also differ between different ethnic groups, so we need to study also and collect data on this aspect and study the pattern. Okay, so with this data in hand, sociologists start to think about, okay, what sort of social structure may have contributed to this, say for example, disproportionate number of ethnic minorities, especially for example the African Americans in the US case, that end up in the hospital having severe symptoms of COVID-19. Okay, is it related to, for example, the racial hierarchy in a particular society, or is it related to their connectedness or their position in the social network? So there are two main possible social structure, like for example, racial hierarchy and social network. And how would this related to the existing health condition in the society, and also the economic conditions in the society as well? So from there, some sociologists will try to infer some what are the logics behind all this happening. Okay, they try to come up with some theory, try to explain the situations. For example, like over the years, sociologists have been talking about social exclusion. Okay, like people, especially for example, some like elderlies who live alone, like in isolated life, or maybe some ethnic minority, they are more likely to be socially excluded from the society. And apart from that, like, is there institutional racism in the system? Okay, institutional racism. So what was institutional racism? It's not just whether the people involved in the system hold a racist values or perception or stereotype. No, sometimes people in this institutional racist system are not necessary to be racist themselves. Okay, But the outcome, as I said, the outcome or the institution itself is racist, you can say so. So people who happen to be working according to the routine or working according to the administrative orders of the institutions will happen to commit a racist act. Or like, for example, like what we just talked about, the treatment outcome, sometimes it may reflect a differentiated treatment outcome between different ethnic groups, okay? And some other sociologists may ask, okay, will the welfare state type of a particular society or nation state influence the trajectory or the development of COVID-19? Okay, so would they say, for example, like the liberal economy when compared to cooperatives, would that be different? Okay, and some will further look into the issue of universal healthcare. Does it really work in mediating the risk associated with COVID-19, something like that? Okay, so that's some initial idea for you. Okay, so what are sociological imagination and how can we use sociological imagination to analyze or to look at this pandemic that's happening now? So the focus will be on first on individual responses and family interaction. Okay, this is a common scene, quite a common experience for many of us now. In the early days of the outbreak of the pandemic, okay, people rush to the supermarket to buy all kinds of necessities and like toilet papers or like cleaning agents or alcohol wipes or other things. So even like people rush to the supermarket to engage in what we call panic buying. Like people get like 4 or 5 pack of rice back home. Anyway, so it looks like for this Japanese lady in the supermarket, like the empty shelf present a personal problem for her. Okay, so she wants to get tissues, but there's none. Okay, so but when a lot of people face the same situations, okay, that they could not buy some very basic household stuff from the supermarket or from the stores, then it become a public issue. Okay, say for example, the chief executive of the Consumer Council, Gilly Wong, said such panic buying of toilet paper can result in 2 major issues. First, the prices will increase. Okay, of course, like more people demand toilet paper, and loss of discounted deals. So in the past, when you buy 2 pack of tissues, you may get extra extra discounted. But now there's no such things. But of course, these are just analyzing this panic buying from a consumer perspective. But what is also trigger maybe perhaps it is a kind of disaster responses. Okay, so while we tend to think panic buying is something not usual in Hong Kong, but how many people have actually think that this is actually one kind of disaster responses that perhaps quite common in other places that periodically face natural disasters? All right, so we'll come back to this point later. So what's sociological imagination? This imagination from personal problem and trying to think of it from something like a public issue. It was proposed by Cyril Mill in the 1959, okay, in his book called The Sociological Imagination, I think, of the same name. So he also say that in this book, the sociological imagination enables one to grasp history and biography and the relations between the two within society. That is its task and its promise. Now, why I say the sociological imagination can help you to think about what happens to you, your social experience at your individual level and family level, because that's something that you can immediately come up in your mind. All right, so let's look at like this. Okay, so biography. What Cyril Mill means by biography is your social experience. Okay, so your social experience would be the following. Okay, there will be social distancing. You are not able to meet your friends. You're not in the past doing basketball. You're not able to play, do these Dragon Boat ways or practices. You're not able to meet someone in bar or pub. You're not even able to meet your parents, perhaps like who live in the nursery home or some long-term care facilities. Okay, so that's one part of social distancing, your social experience. Panic buying, that's something we have just talked about. And quite some of you perhaps also experience having this experience of working at home, okay, home office or work from home. And for parents, you probably have extra social experience of doing some sort of homeschooling. Okay, suddenly you become teachers. All right, so in the past, the parents are the one who support, for example, the teachers at schools. There's a lot of discussion about this in the past, but now it's the teachers who support the parents at home to do most, if not all, of the teaching. So that's your social experience. Now, Cyril Mill said the sociological imagination enables you to grasp history and biography and the relations of two between the society. That is your position. Say, for example, your position within the social structure. What gender are you? Are you like man or woman or LGBT or others? What are your ethnic belonging? What your ethnic group? Or what is your race in some sense? Like you African? Are you like a ethnic minority, something like that? What is your social class? Okay, are you a middle class or a working class or someone who work manual labors or in some very important infrastructure occupations? What is your age? Okay, are you young boys, young girls, or say for example senior citizens? Your migration status. Okay, are you like local permanent citizens or are you migrant laborers? And all this will actually determine your social experience. And they're all different if you actually happen to be fell into different categories. All right. And of course, also about your social network, how many people your connectedness to other persons. Okay. Now, history. So what history? History, we see that there's a few things. First, the pandemic, the COVID-19. This is something that is still happening now. It's like if you look back 10 years later, it's a historical event, of course. Now, globalizations. That's the era we are in. Like nations and nations, society and societies has already in these conditions of high interconnectedness and interdependence. So we depend on each other for a living, and societies connected to each other in a much tighter way than before. Okay, so the sociological imaginations help you to think about the relations between all three. Say, for example, okay, aging society. Okay, and in this photo, this is quite a common practice for quite a lot of the grocery stores or supermarkets in Hong Kong or in other part of the world, that they have specified a special hour, an hour for older shoppers to buy food, so that they do not need to compete with other shoppers of other age group. In some places, they actually also designate a special shopping hours also for the healthcare professions. Now, but we're talking about the older shoppers here. Okay, so they are the elderly. They're the most vulnerable group in these pandemics, especially if in the case of, for example, in Spain or in Italy, if you're living in one of those long-term care facilities, then your risk would be extremely high. Okay. Now, not just that you have a high risk of getting contracted or having a more severe result if you get contracted of this COVID-19, but actually we all know that some or like many of the older citizens, they may have experienced this digital gap compared to the younger generations who are, of course, like what they call digital native. This digital gap the negative impact of this digital gap could be magnified or amplified, especially in terms of social distancing. Okay, so being able to get access to internet is now part of the like essential survival skills in the current social lockdown situations. Okay, so for example, just imagine how many of you have been trying to purchase something online, maybe a mask or maybe through Hong Kong TV Mall, like you buy something like your household, like some meat or vegetables or whatever, like you can go online to buy things, right? So getting online is maybe easy for the younger generations, but they are not necessarily the case for the elderly persons, okay? So they also may experience more social exclusions. So in the past, like the children may visit them once for a while, but now if they are, for example, living in the long-term care facilities, no one would be visiting them for maybe at least 3 or 4 months. So, and also we're talking about those elderly who actually live alone and who are socially isolated from other part of the society as well. So from shopping experience, food security to social psychological well-being, depends on your age group, your experience, your social experience would be quite different. Okay, like this one. So someone has invented some very innovative way to try to improve the social psychological well-being of, for example, those elderly persons during this social lockdown. This is just one example where this is not the first case. It's happening in many parts of the world. They're creating what they call the hugging corridor. So they put up a plastic curtain somewhere in between so that those in social lockdown, for example, the children's or the relative or family members of senior citizens can not just visit them, but also to have them. Okay, just some innovative way to improve perhaps the social psychological well-being of those who are not able to come out. Now, and your social experience also depends on your social class. I came across this Twitter, maybe a blogger on Twitter, like a Monghong, something like that. She posts a interesting note on Twitter and ask her followers or fellow Twitters to look, I just repeated, like tell us about a young child, but say my coworker or my friend's coworker instead of their names. Okay, so what they are trying to say, trying to say is, for example, you substitute your child's name with the term coworker. So this is because many of the white collar workers are actually working at home during social lockdown. So they call it like telecommuting. You're not actually going back to work physically, but you are going back to work like from via the internet or cyberly, something like that. So WFH, work from home. Okay. So for example, my coworker asked for yogurt and is now crying because I gave her yogurt. So some others say my coworker threw herself on the floor wearing cheesecake after I told her we were out of stock, something like that. So a lot of people are making fun of the situations. Of course, they feel stressful about work from home, while at the same time, there was this school lockdown where all the children are staying home as well. Now, the question here is not everyone are actually doing this work from home. Sorry, not everyone is able to work from home. So we need to ask, it depends on your occupation. Okay, so if your occupation involves the production of knowledge, okay, it's easier for you to actually do telecommuting or like work from home. And it's not just allow you more flexibility to work from home, it also allow you more job autonomy, because sometimes you can shift your, because the job nature allows you more autonomy about it. So sometimes you can shift your schedule. For example, if you work from home, you have a meeting at 2:30 and your young child are maybe crying, okay? And may need some attention suddenly. So maybe you have these liberty to actually reschedule your meeting. Okay, like you talk to your boss, look, let's do it 2:45, okay? So you have some sort of job autonomy, and actually it's easier for you to rearrange your homeschooling or remote learning of your kids. Now, but if you're working in the low-end service industry, or like you're working as precarious labor, and your outcome will be quite different. First, you're probably less likely to have the chance to work from home, okay? And you still need to go out and commute to your workplace every day, okay? Like if you're a retailer or if you are someone who work in the transport system, something like that. And you also have a higher chance of, not high chance, you also have not just a high chance of losing a job, you also have a high chance to have your wage lower or to lose more, because you have probably less savings in your bank account than those who work in the middle class or white collar industry. Okay, so you actually suffer more if you work in the low end service sector. Okay, when you lose a job, and you also have a high risk of infection as well. So social class pretty much determine your risk of your how you actually experience this COVID-19. So not everyone have a chance to work from home, right? So migrant workers, okay. So this COVID-19 especially impact on workers that actually migrate to other places to make a living, especially say what I'm saying, like the migrant workers. So this is the case of Singapore. Just a month ago, there was a outbreak among the migrant worker communities over there. Like they are like many scholars have said that these migrant workers are the backbone of globalization. Okay, so without them, there's actually no such thing as globalization. But when this pandemic happened, they are not just sometimes becoming the scapegoat for sometimes literally for spreading the disease. Very often their welfare being ignored or neglected in some scenario. For example, in these cases, because the migrant workers tend to live in communal settings. They share their bathrooms, share their kitchens, and share their dormitories. While at the same time, there's not enough, for example, there's not enough medical supply, medical mask, or these sanitizers being distributed, or there may not be even enough information to guide them how to prevent this COVID-19. So they have fell victim, not just for, like in this case, not just having a high chance to get infected, but they also at the same time more likely to suffer from the economic downturn as a result of this COVID-19 spread of this COVID-19. So this impact will be accumulating. Like for example, what I mean by accumulating means it's not just that they are losing money or they are becoming unemployed or having a lower wage during this incident, but it has a impact also on their younger children as well. So first, let's look at what we've been talking about this impact of COVID-19 on the migrant workers population. They say it predicts there will be a sharpest decline of remittances in recent history. Okay, so it's projected to fall sharply by 20% in 2020 for all these global remittances. So what are remittances? The remittances are these salary or wages where the migrant laborers or migrant workers like redirected or how should I say, like give back or deliver back to their home country, okay? So to support, for example, their family livings and others. So you can imagine, at the same time, there was a global lockdown in schools. So for example, you can see this is another map shown by World Bank, where it shows those countries where all the school has been closed. Okay, all the schools have been closed. Like this map was created in March 24th. All right. So and the yellow one are those countries where the schools are opening up with some sort of limitations. Okay. So you can just imagine if you're migrant worker parents and you're told you're now unemployed or you have to work for lower wages or there's, but at the same time back at your home country, your school is closing. So like normally you can put your children to school so that they can go through the education system or other things. They have to how should I say, supervise the next generation. Okay, so the school closing means the children are back home, and that means extra burden for these migrant parents, and not just the migrant parents, but also not just extra burden like they are now living at home. And some of the school in these countries also provide meals for the children as well. So that means there's no free meal for the children and they have to eat at home or something like that, okay? So the impact on migrant workers are quite, I'll say, complicated. Now, racial inequality, of course, depends on your ways. Your social experience will also be different as well. So according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, ethnic minorities in UX, they are more likely to live in densely populated area, okay? And they're more likely to live in area that's far away from the grocery stores or medical facilities. And they're more likely to be living with their grandparents and great-grandparents, something like that. So multi-generational households. And they're also more likely to be overrepresented in the prisons or in the correctional units. So these are the living conditions that heighten the risk of ethnic minorities contracting COVID-19 and spreading among the community. Now, work circumstances, they're also more likely to work as critical workers or workers in essential industry, but at the same time also low pay, for example, meat cutting. Okay, those meat processing industries, transportations. So it's less likely for them to actually work from home, as I said before. And they also do not have paid sick leave. So even if they have minor symptoms, very often they actually need to continue to work and perhaps like bring this disease back to the workplace. So, and they're also having less and lower access to care and underlying health conditions. They are less likely to have health insurance, and they're more likely to have experiences stigma and other systemic inequalities. So they are more likely to have underlying health conditions, for example, asthma or other other existing conditions that will worsen or increase their risk, for example, fatality or like mortality risk after contracting COVID-19. So not just getting contracted, sometimes they also experience, the ethnic minorities could experience some other issues during this COVID-19 these pandemic situations. For example, in London, the police has been accused of racial profiling, like in lockdown surges. So in this case, it's school workers. He was complaining that the police has misused the stop and search during this pandemic. So there are rules like people could not go out, people have to stay indoor, you can do 1 hour exercise, something like that. But when it comes to like a selection or like a discretion of who should it depends on the discretion of the frontline police. Sometimes they may engage in some sort of racial profiling. That means they're more likely to target certain racial groups in enforcing these social lockdown regulations. All right. Okay, and let's see. Gender and COVID-19, and depending on your gender. Okay, so your response to your social experience of COVID-19 will also be different. Like I would like you to imagine, like just among your personal network, who was the one who actually most worry about getting enough medical mask or medical supply to survive this pandemic, or who would be the one who are most risk aversive, okay, like talking about or really worrying about everything, I don't know. And there's a few different possible interpretation from this. Like on one hand, these homeschooling things or remote learning things may actually reinforce the caring role of certain gender group. Okay, so let's just take a look at this YouTube video. And it's a complaint made by a parents of a, let's see, where's my YouTube? Okay. Angry Ma. So I'll just share this Angry Ma things. All right.
תקשיבו, זה לא עסק, הלמידה מרחוק הזה. באמת, זה פשוט לא, זה בלתי אפשרי. זה לא נורמלי. מהבוקר, אנחנו רק ביום השני, מיליוני הודעות בוואטסאפ, יש לי 4 ילדים שיהיו בריאים, תדמיינו כמה וואטסאפים, כמה מורות לכל ילד, כמה מקצועות לכל ילד, יש לי רק 2 מחשבים בבית, הם רבים מהבוקר על המחשבים, אחד המורים של הבת שלי חי בסרט שהיא ב8 בבוקר תשב לראות אותו על המסך, היא ב8 בבוקר רק הופכת צד במיטה. מה נראה לכם? המורה למוזיקה של הבן הקטן שלי, היא שלחה תווים הבוקר. מה אני אעשה עם המידע הזה? מה, יש לי הרכב של איזו להקה? אני לא יודעת לקרוא תווים. שנייה, אני מוציאה קלרינט ויושבת עם הבן שלי, לעזור לו עם התווים. די, חבר'ה, מורים, תנמיכו ציפיות, זה לא הגיוני. וכל היום, איך הילד מרגיש? איך שיצייר ציור? איך הילד מרגיש? הוא כל היום בפלאפון, טוב לו. ישנים טוב, אוכלים, לא מפסיקים לאכול. איך הוא מרגיש? שאלו אותי איך אני מרגישה. קורסת. אני עוברת מילד לילד, הנה מדעים, הנה מתמטיקה, הנה, חלס, גם איפה אני יודעת את כל הדברים האלה? עכשיו הילדים שלנו יעלו עלינו כמה אנחנו סתומים. זה לא לעניין, באמת. אני יודעת להפוך שבר מדומה. גם אם הוא מדומה, אני רוצה להבין משהו. למה צריך להתעסק איתו? הוא לא אמיתי, עזבו אותו בשקט. מה אני אומרת פה? גמרתם עלינו, זה רק היום השני. אם לא נמות מהקורונה, נמות מלמידה מרחוק. זהו, פרקתי. בבקשה, להוריד קצב, תניחו להם. שיהיה יום מהמם.
All right. So this one is this complaint was made by let's say this one. This one. Hey. Oops. Was made by Israel, a mother in Israel.
全城矚目嘅豪宅項目120 Grange，鄰近新加坡行街勝地。
Okay, let me close it. Anyway. Let's say, okay, hey, this one, okay, sure. Okay, now you can see that the mother has been complaining about this remote learning or homeschooling things. While quite a lot of perhaps our generation here in the region are single child, this mother has 4 children, okay? So she has to allocate, like she only have 2 computers. So she has to decide which children will have the priority to use the computer first for this so-called remote learning. And she also needs to assume the role of the teachers at the same time, like for 4 children. Okay, so that means for each children, like 6 courses, there will be like 24 different teachers in one single, done by one single mother. So a question's concern would be like in terms of family dynamics between, for example, these like caring role. Is it the mother or the father who will be doing this homeschooling things or remote learning things? Of course, you can think from another perspective because the father's also home as well. And the father, maybe some of them may have found a good time to like engage in some sort of in their children's schoolwork or educations. But you can also ask, are they doing it like as if it's really taking this responsibility or just consider it as part of fun. Okay, so there's a gender issues here, whether you reinforce the caring role of a particular gender or not. And in many low-income family, of course, sometimes the breadwinners are, especially in the developing world, the breadwinners are very often the father as well. So they may have a different social experience compared to, of course, a parents of a middle income family. So the World Bank have also issued some sort of group policy notes to ask local administrators or governments to pay attention to the issue of gender. Okay, so how does this COVID-19 affect people experience? For example, during social lockdown, if you are a mother, you may have difficulty actually to visit the hospital, for example, for maternal check or other things, or maybe just a regular check like to the women health services. Okay, there would be disruption to this kind of health services, which according to what World Bank has said, could be proved fatal. For example, they have found the maternal mortality actually raised in some regions during COVID-19. Now, education, as I said, like the Israel mother, she has to reallocate the household resources. Okay, so in developing, especially in the developing world, for example, there was still a very strong gender inequality. So if both of the children are, like for example, a boy and a girl doing this homeschooling at home, like this homeschooling, so how would the family allocate these household resources like computer or time or attentions to either one? So very often they may have privilege over the young boy in such case. Economic impact, because now the mother, they have to also not just to work from home in some cases, but they also have increased time burden to deal with multiple care responsibilities in the condition of school closures. So in such cases, some of them may have to spend fewer time on work, okay, because it's children home now, and they are more likely to suffer food insecurity. I mean the young girls, like in those gender unequal societies, they're more likely to suffer less calorie intakes compared to boys in such a scenario. Because like, for example, if they eat from school, like suppose, for example, the calorie intake would be the same, right? So when you come back to home, maybe it will be different, and it may depends on the gender situation there. So vulnerable forms of employment, that means women are also more likely to end up in employment that receive the hardest hit during the COVID-19. So they are more likely to work, for example, working in hospitality, retail, travel, leisure industries. So they become hardest hit in terms of their economic conditions. And lastly, because the spouses are staying home more often during social lockdown, there has been increase in gender-based violence due to like confinement. So everyone have to stay together in one places. But at the same time, you have reduced the support from your friend or your peers, and you reduce the support from formal networks like the NGOs or social workers are not able to visit you, or you're not able to visit them. So you create another situations, okay, for women or men or other gender group who suffer from this gender-based violence. All right. So like what I try to say is by using sociological imaginations, you can find that your personal experience could be, in fact, quite different like, compared to the one next door, or compared to the one and the other one who are also in the same situations. Okay, so sociology is the gateway to interdisciplinary studies. So all those social hierarchy that I just mentioned are very often key variables when sociologists do research. So sociology is one gateway to interdisciplinary studies. It's also the foundation for social and public policy and provide empirical support to them. And like we also encourage social innovation. So we do not just do research, but we also encourage people to actually adult. Now, and then we come to the third part of today's talk. I try to give you some insight from sociological study of disaster and how we can consider applying the concept of social capital in studying this community resilience. Okay, like basically how a community responds or recover from major disaster incidents. Okay, now first, I will give you some very brief idea what is social capital and why is it and disaster study relevant. First, Putnam wasn't the one that proposed this idea, but he's the one that popularized it in his publication, in his book, Bowling Alone. And these social capital are features of social organizations such as networks, norms, and social trust that facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. So especially in the case of solving collective problems. Now, in the old days, in the 1990s, some sociologists has been keen at applying this concept to various scenarios. For example, criminologists. They have applied this concept social capital to explore, for example, the collective advocacy of a neighborhood in dealing with delinquency in their respective district. Okay, so it can also be applied to disaster scenario as well. Now there are two main dimensions of the social capital: the bonding social capital and the bridging social capital. So what are the bonding social capital? These are resources that are embedded in the social networks that connect the people who are similar to each other. These are, for example, your family members, your church, your neighbors within the neighborhoods. Okay, so these are the resources that you can try to solicit when there's time of difficulties or in other phases. And there's, of course, a high level of trust among people who have strong bonding capital, social capital as well. Now, bridging capitals are resources that allow you to tap on with people who are less similar. Okay, they may live in a different community, or they may happen to be working in the same office with you, but maybe, for example, you are, in the US case, maybe you are African American, or the other one may be a Latin American, or a Asian American, or Chinese American. So like, but the workplace connect these people together. So, and allows you to tap on resources from another possible communities, something like that. So, and why we can apply the sociological study of disasters to the scenario of current pandemics. It is because, like, according to OECD, all right, the medical countermeasures has not been currently available. For example, there has not been any vaccine. There may be some effective medicine to alleviate or reduce the symptoms or other things, but there's no single cure for this COVID-19. So according to this OECD paper, okay, it suggests long medical containment and mitigation measures are the main public health tool in this fight against COVID-19. And this non-medical containment and mitigation measures social nature, like, how should I say, happen within the community, all right? So, and when we talk about mitigations, of course, we're talking about we're trying to reduce the risk of COVID-19. So for disaster risk calculation, they also have actually have a very similar formula, okay? So the risk is a function of the frequency and magnitude of natural event, okay? And you have the hazards, and you have the vulnerability of people, okay? And you have the mitigation. So basically R equal to H times V minus M. Mitigation is the ability of government agencies, other groups and institutions or households to prevent or mitigate and prepare for hazard events. So that's something that happened in your community. So how would social capital influence this aspect? Okay, the study of social capital and disaster management. Starting from the early 2000s, sociologists increasingly apply the concept of social capital to study how community or neighborhood recover from various disasters. Okay, so as I said before, the bonding social capital depends on the trust, the people's participation in community events, whether there's such kind of social norms that people actively engage in the affairs of their own community. So these are the bonding social capital, okay? So just imagine, for example, a family, okay? When a typhoon or when a hurricane like Katrina, back a few years ago, is approaching, okay? You know that from the observatory, a hurricane is approaching, okay? So you can discuss an evacuation plan with people who are close to you, okay, really close to you, who you trust, who share the same network, maybe including your neighbors who look after each other's back. So these are the bonding social capital. People discuss about sharing of vehicles in case there's a flooding and other things, where they should evacuate, how do they get information, so on and so forth, okay? So this, the social capital that you can tap on, like if you live in a certain community. But there are also bridging social capital. Bridging social capital are those that you draw different kind of resources or different kind of informations from another community, all right? Or maybe it could be a NGO, or it could be a university in some cases. And like this bridging capital, social capital, and bonding social capital will be some key resources or access to information when someone facing these natural disasters. Now, at the same time, someone also proposed to use the linking social capital to analyze how communities can have a way or not to have a channel or not to link up with resources provided by the officials or by the authority or by the administrations, okay? So those local administrations will be providing informations or disaster relief, monetary support and other things, but you may not know about it. So you actually need to have a channels to link up with this kind of you actually need to have a channel to link up with this kind of resources, and those would be the linking social capital. So the informal collaboration, interaction with government officials through community development activities, things like that. So that means you have a connection with the government officials, and of course you have a first-hand information of many things. Now, social capital and disaster resiliency. I have looked through some of the past research who tried to apply social capital to explore disaster, and have come up with a few different subtopic here. Okay, so some study how, for example, in Japan, the local compare local communities with stronger social capital with weak social capital. How do they recover from major earthquakes, where relocation and rebuild or reconstruction are necessary, and search and rescue are also one of the top core issues. There are also research that use the concept of social capital to explore aid delivery after the 2004 tsunami in Thailand. Okay, and as I said before, there's quite a lot of research about how social capital indicate, in this case, intervene in information flow and resource flow during and after the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And also someone who applies social capital to explore the differences between a technological disasters and a natural disaster. And also to apply this social capital concept to explore the issue of gender in post-earthquake recovery, in this case in Turkey after the earthquake in 2004. All right, so let's take a look at some of them. Okay, earthquake and reconstruction. In this research, they have actually found that communities who are tightly knitted together, they have strong social capital, They play a most important roles among other concerned stakeholders in rebuilding their own community, okay? So in both cases, the communities with social capital are found to be efficient in rescue and relief. They know each other. They know who's living alone. For example, some elderly living alone, they probably, after the earthquake, they will need immediate support and relief and other things. They know which family may potentially need help, or which family could potentially give help. Okay, like maybe a place for live and others. So, and one most challenging part will be the reconstruction process, because in earthquake, basically there's a physical transformation of the landscape, and also a lot of the building will have been torn down. So during the reconstruction process, community with stronger social capital, they are more likely to work efficiently or effectively in this post-earthquake reconstruction planning, and it's easier to make collective decisions. All right. Now, in the tsunami, 2004 tsunami in Thailand, how would social capital affect this disaster resiliency? It has been found that social capital, for example, they try to like distinguish between two different kinds of aid delivery. One that's top down by the Thai military. For example, they build houses for the local communities who are broken. On the other hand, they also compare this kind of aid delivery to those aid delivery that are mobilized by the local social capital, or the local maybe social activists, or maybe by the local community, the village elders, things like that. So what we found is the bottom-up aid delivery are more likely to mobilize local social capital and direct to the directly toward obtaining resources that fit their local needs. So because they know the local situation very well. So a bottom-up delivery model could allow this aid delivery to be delivered to those that are actually in need. But on the other hand, the top-down model, okay, the one is that like the Thai Military Housing Recovery Initiative, they have provide significant aid. So there's a lot of investment and a lot of money devoted to this housing recovery. But because it's top-down, and it did not really consider, for example, whether the community has been broken down, or whether they will actually group the people from the same community or from the same village together, but rather they will be providing a lot of housing, but without a serious consideration of relinking the community, or to let the community get connected once again, okay, in this post-disaster housing. So there was a mismatch between, as a result, there was also a mismatch between aid and needs in this kind of top-down aid delivery models. Now, in the case of Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, they also found that, for example, when we talk about the bonding social capital, that because they, as I said before, they know the hurricane is coming, and they most likely has to devise some sort of strategies or plan, an evacuation plan, well before the hurricane land. Okay, so that actually most likely happen among people with strong bonding social capital, so people who are the like families and others. But how does this bridging social capital works? For example, in this case, and normally in terms of disaster, the existing social and socioeconomic strata would have blurred, because everyone would be the victim. Like they would be like the refugee mentality. Everyone would maybe look more or less the same. But in this case, it also said that some sort of racial barriers still exist. And these African American participants in this project, in this study, who happen also to be a middle class, who can articulate well, who looks like what they call well-educated, who know many things about governments, administrations and stuff like that. She actually used her this particular status and education to gain access to information that is quite exclusive to the white community at that time. So this information, relief information, where you can get support and money, shelters, sometimes do not spread between different communities, because these tend to spread within community that are tightly knitted together. Okay, they have bonding social capital. Okay, so they share this government, but it's less easy to spread to other community who are not belong to the same one. So in this case, this bridging capital help these African American mother to gain important information about where to get disaster relief and other things. So based on her socioeconomic status and education. Okay, so in some cases, okay, the technological disaster, technological disaster, they are the case of, for example, there's not actually caused by the nature. So you have the natural disaster like hurricane, flooding, or like earthquakes, but you have also technological disaster like oil spill, dam collapse, nuclear meltdown, things like that. So because of the involvement of human in this disaster, the community are more likely to have lost trust in the authority or in even among each others. So they will experience individual stress, collective trauma, lifestyle change, lifescape change, like the loss of ontological security, feelings of blame, and develop into some sort of corrosive community. So these are communities that are characterized by social disruption, a lack of consensus about the environmental damage. Because they actually compare this technological disaster with the natural one. Okay, so for the natural one, it may bring people together. Okay, it may bring people together because everyone facing earthquake is something happened naturally. But for technological disaster, not everyone will have perceived it in the same way. Okay, so how should I say? In the long run, the community will suffer a disruption in social capital, which result in some sort of what they call secondary trauma. Okay, so there will be a higher levels of chronic and long-term stress than other natural disaster in such cases. Okay, and also gender also play a interesting interactive role with social capital. For example, in this case, in Turkey, 2004 earthquake. In many of the disaster studies that like specifically devoted to the study of the issue of gender, in those cases have already found women suffer from a unique vulnerabilities when they respond to or recover from disaster. For example, during the tsunami a few years ago, okay, not a few years ago, like the how should I say, the tsunami, the Christmas tsunami, okay? So it has been discovered in, for example, in Indonesia, female victim or women suffer disproportionately from being drowned in those cases. So why was it the case? Because in those very often village or suburban area where they still live more or less traditional way of life, women are still being tasked with the so-called caretaking role. So many of these women actually go back to try to find the children and they get drowned afterward. Okay, so they have a different, unique vulnerabilities. And of course, men also have a different unique vulnerabilities, but that's not the topic today. Now, in this particular research, I try to explore this issue of gender and social capital in Turkey after the 2004 earthquake. And they have found that women-headed households are more likely to have limited access to formal relief and recovery mechanisms after disasters. Okay, oh no, sorry, like they did not find that. They actually found social capital benefits women during the disaster recovery because these networks were therapeutic in nature. They help the women survivors to gain empowerment. They can attain some sort of civic consciousness by participating in the post-earthquake community actions and various rebuild events. And they can also avoid the stigma of public assistance at the same time, okay? But the problem of this is it may actually reinforce the existing gender role if the women are more likely to have to depend on their traditional social network, like their family or their relative or the other things. So it's like a double-edged sword. Now, Okay, so some preliminary implication to Hong Kong. Let's look at the case of Hong Kong. Now, a few months ago, maybe the EOC chairman has actually written an article talking about some of the information, especially those related to the pandemic or related to COVID-19, usually and having mostly the Chinese version and the English version, but not the in other language that is readable by those ethnic minorities. And maybe they have, but still, it has been found that the ethnic minorities, they may spend days before they could actually receive the translated version of this pandemic related information. And sometimes these translated versions could be pretty much different, okay? May not be the same. And according to the EOC chair, some of the ethnic minorities actually know that Hong Kong has these quarantine measures by looking at the news agencies from their own hometown. So that's the point when they know that, oh, Hong Kong, that's the quarantine measures, okay? So you can see, like, what I'm trying to say is we will need some sort of bridging social capital to allow this sort of information to spread between different communities among Hong Kong. Like, take this example, because of the language barrier, the ethnic minorities, they sometimes do not know where to get a mask. So what happens is once they get know to someone who is queuing up, then they know, okay, maybe there's someone selling mask over there. So because in most of the people in the local context, they communicate through, for example, in Facebook, they communicate mainly with maybe like Chinese or English. So it's less likely, for example, for this sharing of information about where to get masks or how do they get sanitizers may not be easily accessible even on the internet by the ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. And also they may not know, anyway, so apart from information that are crucial to this fight against the pandemic, sometimes the spread of information that is may or may not be accurate could also happen within community with very strong bonding social capital. So, but the information may or may not be accurate. So you actually need a bridging social capital to have to verify various source of informations, all right, such as in the case where one could actually steam the surgical mask in order to reuse it, something like that, all right. Now, lastly, okay, that will be the last part of today's talk, okay, and how can we apply this disaster study to the pandemic situations? Perhaps that's the things that attract your attention most. Now, there's two ways. First, I try to look through also like whether through the literature whether anyone has been spending like close over these two perspectives. Oh, that's actually someone who did that before. Now, Rao and Griff in 2018 did a research in the case of Spanish flu that happened almost a century ago. And they compared the Spanish flu with some natural disaster, okay, like the spring frost. And they found that the causal frame, like they found that like disasters will be more or less have an impact, okay, on the community anyway. But how would you attribute the cause of that disaster will actually impact on the community members, okay, and make them more likely to cooperate with each other or make them less likely to cooperate with each other. So disaster that has a causal frame attributed to the members of their own community are more likely to induce less trust, therefore less cooperative. Like in their case, they try to study the setting up of retail cooperative after the Spanish flu and also after the spring frost. And they found that people are actually less likely to cooperate, okay, and form this retail cooperative after the Spanish flu because they attribute the cause of the disaster to their own community members. They're less likely to trust each other, okay? So in such cases, if you attribute the disaster by your own community members, there will be likely long-term disruption to the community than a natural one, okay? Because like that happened to nature, the nature falls. Okay, so in that case, social investment would be needed to foster social capital to help the community to rehabilitate. Okay, so in another cases, this Peyton and the co-authors, they study how community resilience and preparedness may have influence in response to this flu situation. So how do they carry out the research? They actually ask very interesting questions here, like, does your pandemic plan cover being isolated or remaining at home for up to 4 weeks? Do you have emergency water supplies? Does your plan include gradually building an emergency food supplies over the next few months? And is there someone who could help with food supplies if you and your household are ill? Does your plan consider what you will do if a family member gets sick? Does your plan ensure that everyone knows where important documents are located? If you or your family were isolated or had to remain at home for more than a week, does your plan include blah, 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 blah? Okay. So you can actually ask how people respond to a flu in this research, just like respond to a disaster. Okay. And they have found that there's 2 ways you can improve the community response to in the case of flu. By first reducing this negative outcome expectancy and to increase the positive outcome expectancy. So the positive outcome expectancy are less related to the community thing, so I'm not going to talk about. The negative outcome expectancy are actually related to it, okay? So what are negative outcome expectancy? These are beliefs that pandemic poses too great or complex a threat for individual action to make a difference. So people who believe the cost outweigh the benefit, they would likely to take no further action, okay? For the positive outcome expectancy, these are believed that they can prepare and their preparation can reduce risk and add value to one's life. May not be themselves, but some others. I believe that the benefits outweigh the cost will motivate people to prepare and result in the seeking information about how to manage the pandemic risk, okay? So how to reduce this negative outcome expectancy? All right, so one way is to emphasize the distinction between the cause of a pandemic and the consequence that can be managed, but you also invite people to consider what could be done for more vulnerable members of your own community. For example, like you can put up slogan like think about your children, think about your parents, think about the elderly in the nursery homes, or think about people who work in the critical sectors, people who could not work from home. And by inviting people to consider these more vulnerable members, it actually helped them to come up with strategies that could assist those more vulnerable than themselves. And people, by asking people to come up with strategies, for example, you can protect people who work in the traffic stations by wearing a mask, say for example. Then in such case, you actually have people to reduce their what they call the negative outcome expectancy belief. We will start to break down. That's how this concept of social capital can actually be utilized in such scenario. Anyway, that's just some preliminary finding by after looking through the sociological study of disaster literatures and how someone has already applied it to the situation pandemic years before. Now, this is a summary of part 3, okay? First, the social nature of non-medical containment and mitigation measures, and something we need to consider because it happened in the community. So, and it's not just regulation by the state or by the government that actually work. We also need to consider how social capital of a community could help these non-medical containment and mitigation measures. And what do we get from disaster study? For example, social capital has been found in essential in community response to and recovery from disaster. So will it be also the case when we recover from the pandemics? Okay, so in terms of aid delivery, so we're talking about medical supply or mask or sanitizing supplies. will you use a top-down model, or will you utilize the local social agents, or the one who's rich in local social bonding, social capital, to have to deliver this aid to the local community? And social capital also have to mediate the gender issues. So just think about this case, like family who are able to mobilize their social capital, like to find someone to help look after their children, like during this school lockdowns, probably will have more gain from this scenario. All right, and the sharing of disaster relief information resources, we are talking about, for example, cross-ethnic group information sharing, and also, of course, like resource sharing. So future research, a few future research possibility. First, how does this pandemic has disrupt or erode our social capital? So we need to, for example, we can study the causal frame. Like you have the natural disaster where you attribute the cause to nature, and you have the technological disaster where you can attribute the cause of the disaster to someone. Again, someone like maybe the authority, maybe the technicians who run the technological project. But at the same time, the causal frame for pandemic, basically people can attribute this cause to everyone, because everyone could actually spread this disease to everyone. All right, so the causal frame will be likely different for these three different kind of disasters. And second line of future research, pandemic and community self-advocacy. You say we can measure, for example, the extent of negative outcome expectancy versus the positive outcome expectancy of a particular community, and how this mobilization of bonding or bridging or linking social capital could actually help the community to respond or to rehabilitate or recover from the current pandemic situations. All right, so these are the references that I have used. And just one last slogan before I end today's talk, all right? CUHK Sociology, where sociological imaginations begins. All right, thank you. And I am asked to remind everyone, this is the last of the series of talk. And thank you very much for participating in today's event. And you can subscribe to the following YouTube, and visit our website, email us, or simply call us if you want to know more about the information related. Okay, so this is information of the Faculty of Social Science. This is the information of my own department, Sociology Department, Department of Sociology. And it is time for you to ask a question. All right, Yan. Anyone? So please feel free to type me a questions so I can try to answer. And as a part of social resource mobilization. Yes, and yes, let me repeat a questions. Can bridging social capital during COVID-19 period be understood as a part of social resource mobilization? Yes, I do think so. I just used the example of the our communication between the local Chinese community and the ethnic minority community, where you probably would need this bridging social capital to have the resources and information to flow between different communities that are tightly organized, because within those tightly organized communities, usually information spread pretty fast, but at the same time, they're more likely to be homogeneous. Okay, those information. So you need a lot of bridging social capital to help bring some major information resources concerning the pandemic to different part of the communities, like in Hong Kong and also elsewhere. Okay, any more questions? I think a few colleagues from, just some further notes, I feel a few colleagues from the Education University had just published an article on the world development, trying to research on how, for example, in the case of district council members have to mobilize these resources during the local outbreak. Like how do they help to distribute masks or facilitate the spread of information or pandemic-related information? I think you can go to download it from World Development to have a look at that particular articles. All right. I see. Yes, that's the case. Yes, they do. They do have their own. When migrant workers, for example, come to Hong Kong, they do not read local newspaper first because they're written in Chinese in most of the time, and you probably only have one major English newspaper, SMP, and perhaps EJ, where you can have some sort of like English version of the news written here. And yes, they do bring with them their own, how should I say, source of like media, where they can derive news from their own media. And echo chamber also exists. Yes, they tend more likely because of their restricted access to information outside their own media outlets. So it's likely they do not have access to the spread of pandemic information. That's true. Okay. So that means that's right. So because that means we actually need bridging social capital to help connect them to the local information sources. So sometimes that could be the employers. All right. So for example, employers who have better or have good relationship with their domestic workers at home, they actually sometimes may share news. Okay, like the quarantine measures, the where one can get masks, and some even actually help to source. Sometimes domestic workers, for example, I have heard cases from the newspaper that some English, yeah, the Indonesian domestic workers help the employers to source masks. I personally has helped my own domestic workers to source masks from Hong Kong. All right, so it happened two way. Okay, so yes, but this is some sort of bridging social capital that we are actually talking about. Okay, and not just domestic workers, some NGOs who have to work with ethnic minorities, like Translate for Her, they have to translate important health or medical related informations to spread among their own communities. But of course, it really depends on the bridging social capital. It's not like in a formal institutional way, but it really depends on personal network. You happen to get link up to these NGOs or these social workers or things like that, then you will have access to that kind of information. Okay. If people do not have bridging capital, just bonding capital, will this affect the condition under virus spreading, or how to solve this phenomenon? That's true. Like if there's strong, what they call like a bonding one. Okay, the bonding social capital, but they do not have bridging social capital. How would this affect their condition under the virus spreading? I would say I do not have the answer to this question yet, because this condition, like affect this condition can be quite multifaceted. It could mean the risk of contracting COVID-19. It could mean their condition or as simple as like responding, or are they able to accumulate enough supply to survive the pandemics? So this could all be different, okay? So I do not have answer to that question yet, but I suppose like just in terms of information, essential information sharing, or resources, or these pandemic related resources sharing, I do think bridging capital will be important to tap into these tightly organized communities. But how to solve this phenomenon? I think, as I said, like that's why I come up with the slide here. And this is the case when there's two things here, like yes, because the pandemic tend to create mistrust, or people becoming less trust over each other during this pandemic, because everyone look at another one, regardless you wear a mask or not, as suspicious of potential agent of spreading the disease. All right, so there's a high level of distrust between members if in the case of pandemics, compared to technological disaster and natural disaster. So I think social investment is needed to foster the bridging social capital. In such case, for example, you probably need some social workers, NGOs to help you need to tap on this bridging social capital. You need to invest on them so that they can help to bring this information and support to the specific community. Just like the aid delivery that I just mentioned, when it comes to disaster resilience, because the bridging social capital have to link up these external resources and local resources, and external resources and external information with the local communities, and they know who will be the one who need these resources and information most. Okay, so you actually need to tap on this local, how should I say, like perhaps like in the form of NGO, or like in some cases maybe the district council who know their district well. And also like all kinds of like, of course, like community organizations. And how to solve this phenomenon? Is there any other way to solve? Let me draw from this experience. Is there another way to have to solve this phenomenon? Yeah, I do not have a ready answer for that. So maybe I will come back with an answer when there's more research on this, when this area is done, I think. Perhaps maybe do you have some idea? All right. Yes. Google. Yeah, I haven't talked about the role of social media actually in today's talk, because the social capital, the application of social capital to disaster and other is pretty much like the old school one. So I'm not doing not really focusing on the social media research today. Yes, like Facebook or Google. Well, that you have to deal with the echo chamber issues in such case, but the the algorithm are supposed to create echo chamber, right? Facebook, I mean, like you are supposed to be more likely to read. They try to tailor make your taste in sending you informations in such a scenario. So so maybe, yes, maybe in terms of pandemics, they should actually come up with something like for the social media companies. Okay, thank you very much for your questions. All right, any other questions before we end today's talk? All right, thank you very much. But I think, yes, future research should actually really look into this role of social capital in this current pandemic and post-pandemic recovery. I do think so, all right? So these are the references, maybe interest, so do subscribe to us. I think I have to stop now. It's already over time for 45 minutes. Thank you very much for staying behind. If there's no more questions, then I will leave now, all right? Yan, are you here, Yan? Yes. Shall I just leave?